Hey, what's going on, everyone? I'm excited to share with you one of the most interesting dudes I've come across in my lifetime, Gavin Masumiya, who is a certified professional coach, and he's also was it emotional practitioner.
Yeah, Energy Leadership Index practitioner.
Yes,
Mhm.
yeah. So that's pretty cool. I know IPEC is big on the emotion, like the energy leadership index. So that was interesting when I first took that. I was like, oh, I never have thought of it that way. It's like different levels of energy. So it was a pretty profound experience. And I remember when I took it, I was like, oh, I have a long way to go.
It's a very interesting one because it is an attitudinal assessment versus a personality assessment, which means that
Yeah,
it can change over time as opposed to fitting inside, and they both serve different
yeah,
purposes. So it is cool to have another paradigm to look at for the self awareness.
yeah. It reminded me of this one of the guys I follow. His name is Frederick Dobson, who's like, do you know who he is? He's like
I'm
really
not familiar.
He's really interesting. He writes a lot about like law of attraction, and he was able to have a number assessment for basically all of like basically every celebrity and every like he was able to have like a numerical scale that went up to like 600 or like most people were like in the 100s to 200s, and he was talking about the presidents are like in the 300s, and then like he just it was a really fascinating book, but I was just like, wow, this is interesting stuff.
That's very interesting because actually a friend a while ago when I was mentioning energy leadership in the paradigm, he recommended a book and it was very similar except it was a lot more in depth. Like there was all these
Yeah.
different correlated emotions with different frequencies.
Yes. Yeah.
I forgot what it was, if it was like muscle testing and they were able to base it based on, anger,
Hmm.
what it was. I forgot how they
Yeah.
measured it, but I wonder if it was that person.
Yeah.
Um
It was interesting. Like he was able, it was very detailed. I mean, this book was a really long book, but yeah, you're right. So he was able to like every emotion that we have, there was a numerical scale on it. So, but it was just interesting how he was able to quantify like, Obama, like Donald Trump, like all these presidents and all these like famous people and what number they're at. And I was just like, wow, like I've never read anything like this before.
Super cool, super cool.
Yeah. Well, and I'm also excited. Like, would love to kind of learn a little bit more about your flow fam. It seems like that's really big, and you have quite a community that sings your praises pretty high on FlowFam. But you know, would love to kind of learn a little bit more about like why you started that and your vision for that family.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And for anybody tuning in, yes, FlowFam, I love what everything that it stands for. And it's basically for those, it's about learning how we can really authentically and effectively communicate our truth through the emotive power of music. And that has been a really powerful paradigm of using more gentle music, whether it's lo-fi, whether it's soft ambiance, so you can merely walk. You're going for a walk with music. You're talking to music. You don't have to
Huh.
rap to music. You don't have to rhyme to music. It's all about coming from using the energy that moves the words that we actually speak. And we
Hmm.
also do exercises that don't involve language at all. And it just involves scatting or speaking gibberish so we can get attuned to getting outside of the analytical mind, which
Uh,
is when we're in the analytical mind, we're out of flow. Flow state can be defined as the optimal state of consciousness where we feel there's an emotional component, we feel our best, and we
mm,
also can perform, which means that there's actually a certain level of skill that needs to be met, which makes it easier to get in flow. And so I teach about the power of flow state, the science behind it. There's actually 4 stages of a cycle. I won't get into the whole thing around it, but it directly relates to how we actually speak. And when we get
mm,
into that stream of consciousness, we're no longer analyzing or second guessing ourselves, which is all prefrontal cortex. The inner critic's right
mm,
here.
mm.
Um,
Yeah, that's a good point. I think a lot of the Western culture society is focused on the doing, and we analyze everything. Where it's like, oh, if I do this, I'll make this money. I can pay the rent. I get it. Oftentimes, we're so in our head that we can't truly be present with our spouses or our kids, right? It's like we're always thinking about the next promotion or the next meeting that we have, and it is difficult to get out of our heads and into our bodies, right?
Totally. And also the prefrontal cortex is a very important. It's a part of goal setting. Goal setting is an important piece if to let us know where we'd like to go. And if we can quantify it, it makes it more easier to determine if we're going to get there or if we're not getting there. So it's not to bash on that at all. It's just knowing that we have different parts of our brain, different parts of ourselves that are worth
Hmm.
tapping into as well. And flow is another one that's really great to incubate different ideas, to cross pollinate ideas as well, that can create a
Hmm.
competitive advantage or new idea or just new potential pathways that we can take.
Yeah, that's
Listen,
interesting.
and I call it actually intuitively listening, which is reading between the lines of what people are speaking of, to really get on
Mm,
how they might feel, what they we have done our own share of work in Landmark too, also
yeah.
speaking to those unspoken commitments that they might be up
Mm,
to, and that it's okay if you get it wrong, you're guessing wrong. You just want to guess and live into like how might this other person's experience really be like, and it's
mm.
very sharpened inside of FlowFam.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think oftentimes some people look at intuition as not real, or they don't trust their intuition. They're by external force. They're influenced by external forces. But I often find that our intuition sometimes doesn't make sense to everyone, but it's always the thing that gives us the most fulfillment, right? The most joy when we truly listen to ourselves and explore that and be curious about that.
Yeah, it's a very interesting word because it's hard to quantify. And actually, one of my favorite CEOs, Vishen Lakhiani, the co-founder of Mind Valley, believes that
Yeah.
actually intuition is actually one of the most misunderstood skills and abilities in corporate America, in corporate,
Mm,
and how much that really can be relied upon, especially the more experience that you have in a field, the more
mm,
intuition that can be built because of that experience, where now there's an
mm,
unconscious competence that's created through the experience that's no longer a part of necessarily the analytical mind, it's in the nervous system. And
hmm.
it's very fascinating. And one of his things, which is what I love a lot about him, is he's Vishen's vision is to actually teach intuition into formal education within the next 20 years or less, or to
Wow.
bring it into. And so he wants to shed light and science behind this part that is misunderstood and hard to quantify. It's great.
Huh. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Vishan. When I met him in person for the first time, I was blown away. Like I've never met anyone who was so consciously aware and so connected to every single human being. It felt like everything he said, he was like truly tapping into. It was like a spiritual experience almost. Like I've never felt this way about any speaker, but I just felt that he just genuinely just has everyone's best interest at heart. And he was just so authentic. Like he just had a way of just really connecting with like each person in the room, even though there were hundreds of people in that room. It was very profound.
Yeah. I'm glad that we're on a similar wavelength. There's a lot of overlaps that we definitely do have. And I
Yeah.
think, yeah, there's something to be said about how Mind Valley, the company, has been, I think it was in Forbes, that it was listed as one of the greatest places to work at. Mind you, I don't know all the different metrics that led to that being them in the top five. However, he
Mm-hmm.
places a large emphasis on the happiness of his employees.
Yeah.
And mhm.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think energy levels and law of attraction is becoming more popular in corporate, but it's almost like hushed, right? Like no one will openly admit that, like, oh yeah, like some people are like that's woo woo, but it's often the most successful people in corporate have that, right? That's their way of being, but they wouldn't share that openly and say like so it's interesting how I'm starting to see that shift, right? I think that's becoming more popular, but I think in the past people would say like, oh no, like that's weird, you know.
Oh yeah. Yeah, totally. Because it is misunderstood, and just how media tends to also portray portray things, or the thing on law of attraction, that whole movie on The Secret too got a lot of flack because the
Yeah.
emphasis was a lot around like thinking, like you can think your way into something or without what you want, and they didn't emphasize too
Mm,
much of the action. That was kind of like a big flack, and that's what really
mm,
brought law of attraction more into more of a commercialized, on top of the work of Esther and Abraham Hicks, which is
mm,
really a very unorthodox, eccentric concept that people
mm,
are actually channeling using beings that are outside of this universe. And
mm,
so that could be very hard to actually grasp
mm,
when Esther Hicks is really the one that's kind of like leading the forefront of law of
mm.
attraction. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the guy that got me, Wayne Dyer, was the one who really got me into it. His way of being, and just you can sense his sincerity, like you can sense his spiritual connection. Like he just, everything he says, I feel like is just coming from such a genuine place, you know, like he was the guy that really had me curious about this other spiritual energy and this other way of being, you know.
Beautiful. Yes. I know a little about him. I watched The Shift. That was
Yeah.
recommended by one of my friends, and they're like, don't worry about the production value of it.
Yeah.
Just the storyline of it is really interesting. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I was very fascinated by it. And also the way that he really does hold space. He takes his
Mm.
time. Me, as someone who's very passionate about voice and how voice
Mm.
can actually influence people too, he has a very slow tempo that's very
Yeah.
poised and controlled, like no rush. So he can really ground people. And he's
Huh.
very keen, like he'll stare and he'll really look and be mindful. And that alone is very powerful, especially as a coach. There's this
Mm.
whole analogy of the light post. Have you ever heard of that? The light post. So let's
No.
imagine a guy, he has a 9 to 5 job, for instance, and he walks past this light post, this lamp post every evening before
Huh.
going home, and he stops by the light post, and he hangs out there for 10 minutes, and he just speaks to the light post about anything that's going on, complaining about something that happened with a customer, or some disgruntlement with his wife, or something good that happened. And the
Mm.
premise there is that even if there's no talking back, the fact that it's being released towards this other thing is actually beneficial. And I think on top of
Mm.
Wayne Dyer's undeniable knowledge base that he has, his ability to hold space is one of the most important, I think, precursors to an effective coach.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah, you're right. He's very, yeah, he doesn't speak. He's definitely not like a Tony Robbins, right? Who's like high octane, high energy, jumping up on trampolines. He's the opposite in the sense that he's intentional with his words. He pauses. He's able to truly just be present. Like he's not thinking about the future, but he knows that, you know, he has faith that things always work out for the better. But he's not your like typical life coach, like hoorah rah, like cheerleader type of guy, right? So
Yes.
yeah,
Yes. So
interesting.
that's so awesome, just to know that there's different strokes for different folks, that
Mm,
not everybody is going to connect with the high octane energy of a Tony Robbins. Some people might look and be like, that's way too much energy. That's way too boisterous for me. That's actually
yeah.
obnoxious. Like,
Mm,
why does he yell at people and throw water and say fuck? Why does
yeah,
he do
yeah.
that? And some people that are maybe more religious or have certain types of things will say that's not effective, and that's good,
Mm,
because not some one person shouldn't be the flavor for everybody.
yeah.
And that's the beautiful thing around it. Jack Hagenfield and Wayne Dyer is they
Mm,
have more of this grounded energy that doesn't have as much maybe vocal variety, or they speak really
mm,
fast, or they speak a little more slowly, and that's more
yeah.
pleasing to the ear depending on the individual and the personality type of the audience or the person. So I think it's
Mm.
beautiful. Yeah, there's a flavor
It's
for everyone.
it's interesting you mentioned Jack Canfield as well. Actually, I met him too for the first time in person at a, it's called Day of Greatness.
Ooh,
And
dog.
he,
Day of
yeah,
goodness. Cool.
it was just interesting. Like I just didn't, you know, it's funny how like you read these books and then when you meet someone in person, you have this idea of who they are, but then when you meet them, it's sometimes different than how you anticipate it, right? But he actually was able to like not only hold space really well, but he had a really high rigor, and his, yeah, it was just fascinating because I think we often have like ideas of who we think people are, but then when you meet them, you're like, wow, like I never thought of that, you know? But he was like an enigma. I was like, wow, like much because I think in his books, like it's very soft, it's very like compassionate and loving. But he brought the heat. Like when I met him in person, I was like, wow, like did not expect him to be like that.
Yeah, that's actually really good to know. And it's also expanding too because of the things that I've seen on YouTube. I created like this kind of like an idea on how he is, which
Uh-huh.
is definitely a gross generalization
Yeah.
to see the one dimensionality of person and then
Mhm.
say like that's them.
Right.
Right. And so
Hmm.
even Tony Robbins, he definitely has a softer side. If anybody
Mhm.
saw I'm Not Your Guru on Netflix, I saw that like 8 times. Right. And
Yeah.
just the ability to make shift depending on the other person, which
Huh.
requires a kind of an acuity
Mhm.
to really reading kind of like their body language and what's not being spoken. Once again, that intuitive
Mhm.
listening that I think he's a master at.
Yeah, Tony Robbins. The thing I like about him that's different from all the other coaching programs I've been a part of is he really focuses on like the physical fitness as well and the health, which I appreciate. I think what's missing for me in like landmark or accomplishment coaching, for instance, is like they don't really talk about the physical health as much, you know? So I really appreciate Tony Robbins because like he's very, very big into like your physical health. I think it's all important, right? But I think that's what's missing for at least for me and a lot of other coaching programs. Like they don't ever talk about like the physical health as much.
Yeah, that is actually a really good point because for those of you who really don't know, Tony Robbins emphasizes something known as a triad, and this triad is something that is meant to change your state, right? To try to get into state. So he's worked with people across all these different countries, every continent of the world, and he still emphasizes this triad. There's three different ones. One that I'll is the most important, the quickest way is physiology. So he
Mm-hmm.
says emotion is created by motion. Emotion is energy and motion. So how you use your body, therefore, impacts the way that you feel, therefore impacts your state. And when you go in state, that's where peak performance comes from, which is why he talks about, or there's such an emphasis for the peak performers. They have some type of like morning ritual, for instance. It's
Yeah.
designed to prime them for the day, whether that's being on the rebounder, which I have, like, or
Uh,
whether it's doing your meditation so that you can kind of just cleanse your mind for the day, as opposed to creating what Landmark calls an already always listening for the day based on you didn't
mhm.
get enough sleep. And for those of you who never took an already always listen, you can think about that, right? Like you can imagine you meet people or people or family, and the minute you see them, you already assume you know what they're going to say. And that already creates a reality that's going to be very difficult for you to see outside of that. And that creates the mouse wheel cycle of relationships that
Mm.
end up not working and resentment that lives on. Yeah.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love what you said. I think our families are often where we could see that the most, right? Because we've just had so many years of history with them. I think my already listening of my mom was always like, okay, she's probably gonna complain about life, and she's probably gonna be like, like, did you do this? Or you need, telling me what to do, or kind of like, I think she's also very like spiritual in the sense that she listens to palm readers and she's like into astrology and stuff like that. So I'm just like, okay, she's gonna say something that's really gonna be different than Western culture values. So it was very hard for me to like get over that and just hear her newly.
Wow, that's very interesting. Would you find that I don't mean to turn this table because this interview here, but I'm so curious, just like as like as an Asian American, your mother, is it typical for an Asian American mother to be, or even an Asian mother, maybe not fully even Asian American, to be into palm reading? And
Yeah, in so I'm Vietnamese, and a lot of the older generation, like my grandma and my grandma's grandmother, and they're very superstitious, and like there's all these traditions where even moving into this house, they're like you have to bring a bag of rice and then water. The first thing you do is you turn on the faucet and then you let it overfill, and so they do have a lot of these like superstitions. But yeah, pretty much her whole life, she's always like did palm reading, and she'll be like, "Oh, you should marry on these dates, or you should these important dates. Like you're in feng shui, right? It's like the direction of the house should face this way, and they're very strict. Like if it doesn't fall, like they believe that like more important than science, I would say.
Yeah. Oh, very interesting. Thank you for enlightening me a little bit about traditional Vietnamese culture. Mm.
Yeah, and that for me was always like very challenging. I think as a growing up in America, where everything is backed in science, right? It's like show me the case studies, show me the, like even acupuncture or chiropractor, right? There's not as much data as some of the other Western medicines. And I feel like that meeting more people like yourself, I often find like there's a lot of things that just can't be explained by science, but really do work, right? A lot of the more Eastern um, ways of being, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting thing because as I've been growing, I recently just turned 34, and that's still like, I think in the broader scope is such a baby. In the broad scope of the
Mhm.
universe, I'm so insignificant for one,
Hmm.
and I think there's something empowering about the paradox of acknowledging that we're unique as individuals and yes, really insignificant in the broader scope of the entire
Hmm.
universe. Um, like the more like I'm just growing, the more that I'm getting more connected to just be more open to different modalities.
Hmm.
Because I just realized there's so many things that I don't know and that I don't know that I even don't know. Right. That's
Yeah.
another thing for landmark for anyone. It's just like revealing. That's why I always have coaches myself as a coach. I'm always working with someone because I'm
Yeah.
aware that I have blind spots. I have things that maybe I am aware of but not fully live into, and that it's important to have someone that helps to reflect that, to put kind of like the mirror um, to areas that I can't see because I don't have. Uh,
Hmm.
mm, I'm just kind of going through my life as lived, and sometimes it takes that outside perspective. Um,
Huh.
you know,
What's something recently that you've like discovered with your coach? Because I think it's interesting how the moment they say like the moment you think you know everything is the moment that I think there's like a humility to it, right? It's like in the grand scheme of all the knowledge we probably know in the world, it's maybe like 1% or even not even, right? But I think most of us think that we know like 95% of what's up in the world.
yeah. Could you ask me that question one more time?
Like, what's something like a breakthrough that you've had recently? Because, as someone like yourself who's clearly done a lot of self-development, gone to so many conferences, read so many books, it's interesting to to know that there's so much more to learn.
So one of the more recent things is that there are two principles two FlowFam principles. And for anyone that's more interested, feel free to come onto my Instagram or go to flowfam.com to learn more about it. There's two important FlowFam principles. And so one's called Flow's just around the corner. And the second one's called Rally the Cipher. Uh, I'll emphasize Rally the Cipher right here for the example. Rally the Cipher basically is about achieving group flow. Achieving group flow means that people coming together are giving their undivided attention into a space that creates this group synergy, this group flow as they call it. You'll see that in musicians when they come together, or people that just align with values that had different skill sets, and they're able to create something much bigger than just two of them or just one of them can do on their own. And what a breakthrough that I'm breaking through here is actually rallying the cipher, not just when I'm facilitating these spaces, but in my life, rallying the cipher and helping to start to create a team around FlowFam, people that are
Mhm.
actually really into it. And there's somebody that actually have a meeting in the afternoon today who's interested in volunteering to do some social media / videography work for FlowFam, right?
Wow.
And I used to be very kind of like protective of this because this kind of was my baby. And
Yeah.
even if like people wanted to facilitate the spaces, I would say hold up, I almost have like these mental check boxes. Wait, there's really fundamental things that you still need to grow into.
Mhm.
And so it's just about learning to trust more,
Mhm.
and um in the process while also discerning, like, so being discerning and also learning to trust.
Hmm.
And it's a beautifully messy journey of rallying the cipher in my life and expanding FlowFam into the world. Yes.
That's interesting. Yeah. I think trust and faith in general is such a hard, at least for me, is like one of the hardest things, right? Because sometimes it's just not tangible and it's hard to know like, well, how are things gonna work out? But for some odd reason, everything always works out for me, right? It like as much as I try to control things and I try to like force or I try to like out, work hard to whatever, I feel like the moment I just let go and just have faith that and trust the process, it always works out. But it's like the hardest thing in the world for me to do.
Yes, yes. And as you say that, it just reminds me of the quote that probably most of us know is that Steve Jobs commencement speech quote that like, it's only sometimes like looking back, do things make sense? Right. And
Mm,
there's no telling when, if it's a month after a breakup or a year
mm,
after or 5 years after getting fired from a job that you thought was the lowest point in your life, it could have
mm,
shifted and inspired a trip around the world to really learn about other cultures, which inspired a
mm,
passion to actually help to create more clean water for people that have to travel 3 miles to go to wells that are infested with malaria.
mm,
Right. But that never would have
mm,
happened without getting laid off so that you can make a trip to go soul searching to find that
mm,
well and see fit families establish and actually their lifespan being so much lower than in Western
mm.
culture, something like that, right? And so
Yeah.
um the faith part or the trust in the process of it, which is something that I get to continue to work on myself, y'all. So don't think that like I'm a guru or put me on a pedestal as well. I'm on this human journey as well. I learned that when I
Mm,
can trust more, that life does become more enjoyable. And yet, one of my favorite poems right now is called Rumi the Guest House. And actually, I would love, is it all right if I share it here?
yeah, I would love to hear it.
Okay. All right. So everybody, so Rumi, I believe he's a Persian poet. And my friend shared this with me. A lot of his poems sometimes is a little hard to understand because of the language on how they do that kind of like old, kind of like poetic way of phrasing things.
Mm,
However, this one right here really moved me. And it was through like a kind of a harder time that I was going through. So let me actually find this, y'all. And I appreciate the patience that y'all are going through. Here we go. Here we go. All right, here it is. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house, empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, that shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond.
mm. Yeah, I love that. I think we often run away from malice and these negative emotions, but I think if we befriend them, like you said, there's so much possible. Not from a place of like fixing or wanting it to go differently, but from a place of dancing in the moment and
Mm,
also just seeing what's possible through having a vision and then finding a family or finding a group of people that you can kind of go on that journey with, you know.
yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Mhm. It is. And like, I think the last part about each has been sent as a guide from beyond that, I kind of look at these experiences of, I even think of when I was extremely burnt out in 2000 and early 2018. And I was still doing social services. I was working with the most difficult client in the agency who was very aggressive, injured some of the teachers. He would like flip tables around. And
Mm,
I went during those situations when someone's a really a child, you do something called crisis prevention intervention, where you do certain kinds of holds to hold them down.
mm,
And I was such at a point of burnout that
mm,
I kind of like I removed this kid from the classroom and I put him in this CPI hold for a while. And I was so burnt out that I just like held him there for a minute because and like some of the teachers said, is Gavin okay? I don't usually see him flip out in this way. And I was
mm,
so at the end, at the end of, I had no tolerance for everything. And I wasn't mad at the kid. And so this is where it is, that resentment, that was not about the kid. That was me knowing that this job, I have way overextended my stay at this job.
Mm.
And so it was trying to tell me something,
Hmm.
you know? And the very interesting thing about that is that shortly after that, I used to listen to a lot of Lewis Howes, the School of Greatness podcast. For those of you who don't know, he's an amazing podcast host. We talk about holding space. He knows how to hold space from a
Mm.
very humble place. He was
Yeah.
interviewing this actress one time. And as I was driving to work, and I was so burnt out still. And then the actress said something like, when you've been working at a company for over 6 years and you're not happy there, and it's kind of like this persistent kind of unhappiness that turns into a little resignation, there's
Mm.
something inside of you that tells you that you need to make a big change in your life. And as I heard that, I'm pulling to the side of the curb and I shut off the ignition. And that was another one of those moments where I think I saw that for me, I can't prove it, but I just saw like, holy shit, I've been at this job for over 6 years. I'm burnt out to the
Mm.
ground. And I thought, and it made me feel like that person, that actress was actually talking to me.
Mm.
And I think that the universe has a way, if we're receptive and open enough to be open, like maybe the universe is sending me messages. And if it is, what is it trying to tell me? And I think that is the part where I'm bringing a little more of this sense of mysticism or openness and receptivity to the universe that maybe someone that's extremely like scientific focused may not connect with. And that's
Mm.
cool. I've been subscribing to this notion more of like, I never used the word God before because I didn't grow up. I played basketball on Sundays. That was my church. I played basketball games for CBO, this Crescent Bay Optimist Japanese league. And so,
Mm.
but I remember this interview from Drake, right? We can learn through the experiences and words from other people too. And he's like, yeah, I believe in God. He was asked one time in a casual interview, and they're like, how? What makes you believe in God? Because there's a lot of people that don't. And he's like, well, during those quiet moments after a show or after an interview or after I start hanging out with somebody and I'm by myself. And those moments where like you're just talking to yourself or you're just speaking out loud and nobody else is actually physically there. During those moments, I'd like to think that there's someone out there listening. And I call that God. Now, look, I can't prove that. There's no science to prove that. So this is not to tell anybody to live into what I believe is true. That's just what resonates with me. That's what he said. And so
Yeah.
that's my concept of God, that when I speak into that open space during those quiet moments when I'm alone, I'd like to think that somebody's listening,
Mm.
you know?
Hmm.
So we make the meaning, like that's the thing. My favorite book is A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, Jewish clinical psychologist in World War II, who had that analytical mind as a prisoner of war in Nazi concentration camps. And in
Mm.
logotherapy, the therapy he coined, which is now established across all coaching and therapy, leads upon the notion that even under the grimmest of circumstances, one can create a meaning for one's life to be worthy of suffering, to be worthy of it. And that there's a preconceived notion then that suffering is inevitable, and it totally makes sense in the situation that he was in, but it's just the meaning is really what can dictate so much of life. So how can we create more empowering meaning in situations, can create more of an empowering and fulfilling life?
Mm. Yeah, you're right. I mean, even thinking for me, right, like all of the most painful memories I've ever had, like have led to the most beautiful, like discoveries and breakthroughs, right? Like my dad leaving us when we were like young, it was so heartbreaking, but it gave me the ability to connect with anyone, right? And then, like when I got held back from school or when my parents used to hit me or whatever, like I just have so much more compassion because, we all go through similar experiences, right? Like all the breakups, all the addiction to drugs, like everything, right? It made me such a more understanding, compassionate human being.
Yes,
Yeah, appreciate you sharing that wisdom. Yeah.
man. I mean, you bring up, there's so many different things that like, thank you for sharing all of that. And I like to subscribe to this notion that nothing's wasted, you know? And what occurs to me in a way is, all these different, we've done a whole bunch of quote unquote personal development stuff, which is such an
Mhm.
overused word now. And it's just like, there's these programs that are designed for us to go inside to really find out more, to understand ourselves more deeply. What do we really value? What are we bumping
Yeah.
up against? What are we leaving to other people that we should be doing ourselves? Where are we being too people pleaser when we should put a stake in the ground? Right.
Yeah.
And inside of that, like I think of some of those darkest moments, it creates a pathway for something else. It's a
Mhm.
guide. It's serving us, like we're violating our values in some shape or
Mhm.
form, or we don't even know our values. And that's worthy of looking like, what is important to me then?
Mhm.
Am I subscribing to the values of the intersectionality of my family and of religion, which I don't even really resonate with, but I don't want to hurt my parents' feelings and express something that might go against them,
Mhm.
you know? And so I think of the whole notion of the breakdown to breakthrough. And this
Hmm.
is for anyone that's actually tuning in. You can even just think about a big breakthrough that you've had in your life, like a big one, right? Whether it was like um, finding a job, finding the job that you always wanted, or meeting somebody and then you fell in love and ended up being your life partner, someone that you're still with, right? Or who you were for X period of time. See if there was some sort of breakdown that preceded it,
Yeah.
and see if there and for anyone just tuning, just see that, like, was there a breakdown that came before that, however big or however small? And so there's this
Yeah.
notion that, breakthrough and breakdown and breakthrough, they're two sides of the same coin, right? Shout out to Landmark.
Mm.
We can learn from so many different modalities, but that's so
Yeah.
empowering. Then every time whenever I find myself in a breakdown, I'm like, there's something that's going to
Mm.
come from this. There's some seedling that's going to blossom out of this right here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's beautiful that you connected the dots like that, because I think so many of us are so in it that it's hard for us to see that there's something that will come from it. We're just stuck in it. And some of us stay stuck in it for a really long time, right?
Yes.
But yeah, I'm always now I would say I'm purposely creating breakdowns because I'm like, okay, well, I think I'll just
Mhm.
grow as a human
I
being,
love
right?
that.
But people
Yes.
are often like, why do you, it's like you're almost self-sabotaging on purpose. I'm like, yeah, because I think that's what makes life interesting. And, I know if I am super uncomfortable,
Yeah.
I know that that means there's something in it for me, you
Mhm.
know? So I try to be uncomfortable every day because of it, you know?
Beautiful. Yeah, that's one of the reasons for my 3-minute cold showers in the morning.
Oh yeah. Oh, dude, it's funny you mentioned that. That's still the one thing that has been the hardest for me to do. Like the cold showers. Like I'm willing to be with it, but there's a threshold, and I'm like,
Yeah.
ugh.
And I will say for everybody, like right now I am in like Sedona. I'm at a friend's place. It's really hot over here, so cold showers are not really a problem here. And I'm from Los Angeles, so although it's a little colder over there, that would be a
Yeah.
different story than wintertime in Chicago. So that's something that I also take into account.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, but it still is uncomfortable, and it's
yeah.
just like how to shock the body first thing, like one of the first things in the morning, just to prime yourself for like, hey, uncomfortable is where
Mm.
growth comes from, is the stretching of the muscles, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
breaking down of the muscles. Yeah.
Yeah, man, that's good stuff. Honestly, it's always interesting because when we come with an open mind, we don't have like an agenda. Like the conversations are always more connected and they flow better, right? I think
Mhm.
when we each have like our own preconceived notions or expectations, that's when there's sometimes like a disconnect, because it's like one person wants to say one thing, one person's trying to get the other person to think a different way. But
Yeah.
like you said, I definitely feel like group flow in this instance. Like I feel like we're definitely on the same page.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so like as you're saying that, two things actually come to mind for me. And the first one was, I didn't mention the first FlowFam principle or break it down. That flow's just around the corner. I said that there are 4 stages to a flow cycle. And for anyone that's tunes in, you can feel free to look it up. It's Stephen Kotler has really spearheaded the work. He's one of the cutting edge researchers in the world around flow state, along with Jamie Wheel. And so the 4 stages is called struggle, release, flow state, and recovery. And struggle is a really important one because it's referring to something known as the skills challenge ratio. And that's just a fancy word, but it's basically when you're learning anything new, that it's probably going to be a little hard. And it should be. You're stretching yourself beyond where your current skill level is at. So it actually should be a little difficult. Some researchers say 4% more difficult, so just a little more. So, but it should be a little more difficult. And so, but that means it's like there's nothing wrong because you're struggling or it's something's hard. it's a part of the process. In fact, it's the first phase of the flow cycle. And release, the second one, the R, is where the parasympathetic nervous system is engaged. And that's where we want to relax. And now that can also look like stepping away from the activity at hand, so to allow room for a shower moment, to allow room for the smelling the flowers and an idea coming through. Stepping away allows the subconscious mind to start doing a little bit of the work, right?
Huh.
And so by relaxing, that key is breathing. We relax. And when we relax, we judge ourselves less. And when we judge ourselves less, that's a prerequisite to getting in the flow, because flow is when the analytical mind goes out the window. And it's a really like a beautiful thing. So I do different exercises in FlowFam because it's all about emphasizing people to build more confidence, expressing themselves, while doing maybe a metaphor game, which leans upon the power of meaning, how we can create meaning in arbitrary objects, right? Like, and so maybe I'll say, you know, pass it on to, and say to you, like, all right, here, I'm going to give it to you. Life is like a cup of coffee. And you have to create it, you know? Yeah. Life is like a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
You know, the cup actually has a shape and you can pour coffee. It could be hot, it could be cold, and the hell with it. It doesn't even have to be coffee. You could put anything in here, and yet people can get stuck. People can get stuck thinking that it's only meant for coffee. Or I'm only allowed to do this one thing in life, when maybe there's something else that you wanted to try, but it hasn't been fully tried yet in your family or in the people that you know, but you know there's something different that you want, but you don't have evidence to back it up yet. And you can continue filling this up with a cup of coffee. Or you know what, you can say, fuck it, I'm going to pour kombucha in here and I want to see how that tastes. You know? And so basically it's creating meaning off of some random noun. And these are just great practices to have. And after a certain point, people realize like the thinking mind stops after a while when people have just the courage to trust and to keep on following the breadcrumbs, knowing that flow is just around the corner.
I love that. Yeah, I do think it's interesting, right? Because, you know, we've been in America for, what is it, like 400 years now or something like that. So we're still like a relatively new like country, right? But if we're present to like, wow, how much we've created from almost essentially from scratch in those 400 years, it's very interesting. And then we still have so much more room to grow, right? It's like every day there's new breakthroughs, there's new things are transcending the status quo, and it's just cool to be a part of that. I feel like it's just a beautiful world that we live in where anything is possible. Like even a year ago, to think that I would be working remotely, I would have never thought that was possible, because I was always like an office guy. Like I like, you know, social interactions, but I took a job where it's 100% remote. And, you know, I think there's so much more possible when we purposely are uncomfortable. I took this job because I'm like, it would be really uncomfortable because I'm going to be with myself like 24/7, you know? And that was for me, that was extremely challenging.
Shout out to you and shout out to Carol Dweck. Carol Dweck has that book called Mindset for Everyone. And she's the one that distinguished between having a fixed grind mindset versus a growth mindset. Fixed mindset meaning like, you know, in a way, our intelligence is fixed. Whereas the growth mindset is more, no, it's actually more malleable. And so you, my friend, definitely have a growth mindset. And with that, with the kombucha in my coffee cup right here, cheers.
Cheers.
Hey, is that kombucha too?
Yeah.
I love this.
I love it. Yeah, this is actually kind of funny, but even this was something that I had to like break through around, because I was like, oh, it tastes weird. Like, why are some people into it? But now I'm obsessed with it. I'm like, wow, this is so good.
Check this out. The beautiful thing about that too, right, is like, me too. I didn't like it at first. It actually, I thought it made me gassy. It's just, it's such an amazing kind of thing as humans, how easy it is to adapt, to get used to something, to acquire something. I liken it too for quote unquote, if in a world of morality, like for better or for worse kind of thing. That like, you know, I live in Los Angeles, so I don't go there often, but I went many times to downtown Los Angeles. And for those of you who know downtown Los Angeles, you have San Pedro Street, which is basically Skid Row, right? And Skid Row is where there's just a huge homelessness issue there, huge
Yeah.
homelessness issue going on over there. And like, you can't not see it. However, the more you go there, it's kind of like the whole thing of you watching the Rodney King being over and over and over again. You start to become desensitized to it. And
Mm,
that's getting used to things as well, or getting used to tolerating certain things in life. So
mm,
you see, like, kind of that metaphor game kind of primes me to think more metaphorically,
mm.
which is one of the practical things inside of FlowFam. Is like to teach people how to think more in metaphors. It allows people to
Ah,
explain things in ways that makes it easier for people to understand. That's why
yeah.
it helps to simplify complex concepts, and
Huh.
it uses creativity, and creative expression is actually a flow trigger. They call it one of the 17 flow triggers. And I believe
Ah,
too, this is my own subjective thing, that like when we're able to express ourselves creatively, and usually that's through people that have hobbies, whether you monetize it or not, it doesn't matter.
mm,
It's like that is an important part of living a fulfilled life, in my opinion.
mm,
And so just off of kombucha not liking it at first and growing to like it, it's nothing occurs in isolation. It's just like, where else am I getting accustomed to
mm.
something that I didn't like before, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
That's beautiful, Gavin. Well, thank you so much. I definitely want to acknowledge you for just the communities that you're creating in the world, and just for I really see that you're so connected to everything, right? Every human being you come across, like you leave a mark. You're you're really good at holding space, but you're also not afraid to dance in the moment, right? You're dancing in the conversation. And yeah, I'm so glad we crossed paths. You know, I think you're a super interesting guy, and I have no doubt that we'll have many more meaningful interactions together.
I look forward to that, brother.
Yeah, thank
Appreciate you.
you.
Absolutely.